and welcome back. In today's video we will continue with elements related to text, and we will start with structural and semantic text elements. Alright, let's begin. In HTML, structural and semantic text elements define the meaning and purpose of various text sections, impacting both page layout and accessibility. Unlike basic text formatting, these elements are designed to structure content in a way that aligns with its logical and contextual role within a document. For example, elements in this group may indicate contact information, dates, or emphasis text, guiding browsers and assistive technologies to interpret and present content with added clarity. Effects on text and layout. Elements in this group often create block or inline blocks on the page, contributing to the document's flow and readability. For instance, the address element can display contact information as a distinct block, while the time element denotes dates and times in a way that can be easily recognized by search engines and screen readers. This semantic structure ensures that the content is not only visually clear but also well organized within the document's layout, enhancing the page's usability and accessibility. Differences from other groups. Compared to other text groups, structural and semantic text elements focus on providing context to content rather than merely styling or formatting it. Typography and formatting elements, for example, affect the visual appearance, like bold, italic, and so on, without necessarily conveying the content's structural role. By contrast, structural and semantic elements help browsers, search engines, and screen readers understand the relationships between different parts of a page, offering improved search engine optimization and user navigation. So here are the structural text elements that you might need on your page. We'll first start with the address element. The address element is a semantic HTML tag used to represent contact information for the author or owner of a document or section. This element organizes contact information in a structural way, which is helpful for both browsers and assistive technologies. It signals to search engines and accessibility tools that the enclosed content is specifically for contact purposes, improving clarity and user experience. Use the address element when including contact details for an individual, organization, or section-specific author information. It's ideal in the footer or sidebar of a page, as well as within sections where related contact details are essential for user interaction. So on VS Code over here, I'm going to add a new section that will contain the address element example. I'm going to add the H2 element and type address element. So now we're going to add the address element. The address element has an opening and a closing tag. This element will display the information inside it as a block of content or a block of information. So in this example, I'm going to type contact us, for example, and I'm going to add a link. This link will be a reference for an email. The address element itself does not require specific attributes, but combining it with links, emails, or social media is common for practical contact purposes. So I'm just going to add the channel's email, for example. Now this element is the break element. The break element, as it's called, it breaks the line and creates a new line on the page. Now we'll be adding another information, for example, the location, 123 code, dev city, and so on. And I will be adding another break element to add a new line for the phone number, for example. Now, as you can see over here, how the information is displayed displayed. Now place the address element within the footer of a web page when providing contact details for the entire site. When offering contact information for a specific author or section, include the address element within that particular section. If you're providing a physical address unrelated to contacting the content author, it's best to use a regular paragraph element or another appropriate element. Avoid using the address element for general locations or addresses not intended as contact information, for example, for showing the location of a story or event. The address element should not be used for every instance of an address on a web page. It's meant for specific contact information related to the content's owner or author. Keep the address element focused only on contact details. Extra details that don't serve a contact purpose can be confusing and should be placed outside this element. Now, second, we have the time element. The time element is used to specify a precise date, time, or both. It's especially useful for indicating information such as publication dates, event schedules, and deadlines in a structured way. The time element provides meaningful data that both users and automated systems such as search engines and accessibility tools can interpret accurately. This helps search engines recognize event dates for indexing, improves accessibility for users with assistive technologies, and generally clarifies the document's timeline for users. Use the time element when including a specific date, time, or both for publication, deadlines, events, or scheduling, or any other context where it's important to clearly point a time. Okay, now I'm going to add a new section that will contain the time element example. I will add an h2 element as a subheading over here and just type time element. Now, the first use of the time element is to add a date. In this example, I'm going to add a paragraph element. For example, a date for a publication. So I'm going to add published on and add the time element. The time element has an opening and a closing tag, and I'm going to add the date time attribute. Now this attribute allows you to set a standardized computer-friendly version of the date or time using a format like the year, the month, and the day for dates, and the same format with time as well. It is important to add the date time attribute with the time element. So here I'm going to add the year 24 and the month will be October, the date will be 19, for example. As you can see over here, when you type this information inside of the date and time attribute, it will not be displayed on the page. So you need to type the time and date between these time element over here. I'm going to add the October 19, 24, for example. Now, second usage for this time element, you can also add time with the date. So, for example, I will add a workshop time and date. I'm going to add a paragraph element. The workshop will be held on, for example, I'm going to add the time element. We have added the year, the month, November, for example, and the day of the month. The T over here is a separator indicating the start of the time component, and follows this T is the time format in 24-hour format. The time in this example will be 10 a.m. A third usage for the time element, you can also add dates for a last update, for example. So I'm going to add a paragraph element and type our last update was, it will be, for example, on December 25th, 2023. Alright, so always add the date time attribute for accuracy, as it provides a format that automated tools can interpret. Use the time element only for real dates or times. Avoid using it for expressions that imply time but aren't specific. For example, some time in the past or one day in summer. These all are incorrect usage for the time element. Not including the date time attribute weakens the element's usefulness because it doesn't give tools a structured format to understand the date or time accurately. Avoid using the time element for words or phrases that suggest a general time without a specific date or clock time, like one day, soon, or in the future, for example. Now, another element over here, which is the block quote element. The block quote element is used to represent a section of text quoted from another source. It is a block level element, meaning it creates its own block on the page, which visually distinguishes it from other text. To structure longer quotes, it adds semantic clarity by signaling that the enclosed text is an extended quotation, not original to the current author. The block quote element not only separates quotes from the main text, but also provides a means of attribution through the cite attribute. This can improve credibility by linking to the original source. So back on VS Code, I'm going to add another section for the block quote element, adding the subheading H2, the block quote element. Now we will add the block quote element. As you can see, the block quote element has an opening and a closing tag. Inside the block quote element, we'll add the attribute cite. This optional attribute is used to include a URL or reference to the original source, providing context and helping with credibility. So I'm going to add an example link inside of this cite attribute, and between these block quote elements, we will add our quote. For example, so you can see how the block quote was displayed on the page, and it has its own style. Now, if you want to display a quote but within a paragraph or a line of text for shorter or inline quotations with a sentence, you can use the quote element instead of the block quote element. The quote element is used for brief quotes within running text and will typically display with quotation marks around the enclosed text. So in this example, I'm going to add an H3 element to represent a new subheading, which is the quote element. Now this element wraps a short quote, which will be displayed with quotation marks around it. Unlike the block quote, the quote element is an inline element, meaning it flows naturally within the surrounding text without creating a new block or additional space. So you can add it simply inside of a paragraph element. For example, in here I added the paragraph element, the famous saying goes, and add a quote element and just type the quote. So as you can see, this quote was displayed within the paragraph element. No spaces, no margins. It was displayed normally within the paragraph. Add the cite attribute wherever possible, as it gives readers an easy way to verify and locate the source material. Avoid using the block quote element for styling alone. Instead, use it only when genuinely quoting an external source. Now, another element, which is the cite element. The cite element is used to reference the title of a work, such as a book, article, movie, or other creative or academic work. It's typically displayed in italic by default, distinguishing the cited title from regular text. The cite element helps indicate that a specific part of the text references an external work or resource. This adds a semantic meaning, making it clear to both users and search engines that the content content is a citation while also improving accessibility for screen readers. So before, when I explained about the block code element, I used the attribute cite. So some of you might be wondering by now, is there a difference between the cite attribute and the cite element? Well, yes, they are different and they serve different purposes. The cite attribute is used within elements like the block code element or the code element to provide a reference to the source of the code or content. It can hold a link that points to the original source. On the other hand, the cite element is used to mark the title of a work, for example, a book, an article, a movie, or so on. So in this example over here, I'm going to add a new section for the cite element example. I will add an H2 element or a subheading called cite element. Then I will add a paragraph element, and I will say, for example, one of the most influential books on modern philosophy is, and add the cite element. As you can see, the cite element has an opening and a closing tag. In between these elements, just add the cited work. For example, in here I'm going to add the book name, which is The Republic, and after the cited work or the cited book, I'm going to add by Plato. Avoid using cite element for names of people or institutions. For example, use it for the title of a work like Inception, for example, but not for Christopher Nolan. The cite element often appears in italic. Avoid relying on it slowly for visual styling, as it serves a distinct semantic purpose. Now we have another element over here, which is the definition element. The definition element is used to define a term for the first time in a document. It provides a semantic marker to indicate that the term is being introduced or defined, which is especially useful for reference materials, glossaries, and technical documents. The definition element highlights that a term is being defined, allowing both users and assistive technologies to understand the importance of the term in context. This can improve the document's readability and accessibility. Use the definition element the first time a term is introduced and defined in the document. It should not be used repeatedly for the same term. Instead, it's intended for the initial definition. So I'm going to add a new section over here for the definition element example. In this example, I'll be adding a paragraph element. Add the word that you want to define. For example, in here I'm going to add DOM, which is the document object model, is a programming interface for web document. So as you can see how this definition was displayed on the page. Avoid using the definition multiple times for the same term in a single document. Once it's defined, you can use the term without the definition element. Common or simple words don't require a definition element. Now we have a new element, which is the abbreviation element. The abbreviation element is used to represent abbreviations or acronyms in HTML. It allows you to provide a full description of the abbreviation using the title attribute, which displays as a tooltip when users hover over the text. The abbreviation element makes documents more accessible by offering additional information about abbreviations and acronyms. This can help users and assistive technologies understand potentially unfamiliar terms. So use the abbreviation whenever you introduce an abbreviation, acronym, or initialism that might be unfamiliar to readers. So in this example over here, I'm going to add a new section for the abbreviation element. As you can see, the abbreviation element has an opening and a closing tag. And in between these elements, I will add HTML, for example. Now the title element over here, when users hover over HTML, they will see the hypertext markup language. This makes it clear what HTML stands for, and it enhances both readability and accessibility. So as you can see over here, when I hover over the word HTML, the title will appear and it says hypertext markup language. You should use the abbreviation element the first time an abbreviation or acronym appears in your document to provide context. Once the abbreviation has been introduced and explained, you do not need to mark it up with abbreviation every time it's mentioned afterward. This helps avoid redundancy and keeps the document cleaner while still making sure users understand the abbreviation when they first encounter it. Always pair the abbreviation with a title attribute to provide the expanded form of the abbreviation. Without the title attribute, the abbreviation element loses much of its value, so always include it for clarification. Another element over here, which is the mark element. It is used to highlight or emphasize text that is particularly relevant in its current context. The marked text typically appears within a yellow background, making it stand out from surrounding content. The mark element is useful for drawing attention to specific parts of the text that are relevant to the reader's focus or for search results and references in a document. Use the mark element for emphasis in scenarios like search results, key points, or when referring to parts of text that are crucial to the document's main purpose. I'm going to add a paragraph element, and inside this paragraph element will add a mark element. As you can see, the mark element have an opening and a closing tag. I will type HTML5 for example. On the page over here you can see that it is displayed with a yellow background. The mark element highlights the HTML5 as an imported term, guiding the reader's attention to its relevance in the paragraph. Avoid using the mark element slowly for visual styling. It's intended for marking text that has contextual significance. Now another element over here, which is the keyboard element. The keyboard element represents user input, typically keyboard input. It indicates that the text enclosed is something the user should type. This element helps convey instructions or examples of user input in a clear and recognizable way. Use the keyboard element when providing instructions for user actions such as typing commands or filling in forms. So in this example over here, I'm going to type a paragraph element, and for example, for the user to save changes, the user will have to press Ctrl+S. So to display these input commands, I will type Ctrl between the keyboard element. As you can see, it has an opening and a closing tag, and as well as for the S key over here. As you can see, it is displayed in a different style than the paragraph text. Avoid using it for mouse clicks or touchscreen actions, as it specifically denotes keyboard input. Don't use the keyboard excessively for regular text. Reserve it for actual input examples. Now we have over here the sample element. The sample element represents sample output from a program or command line interface. It denotes the text that is the result of executing a program or command. This provides a semantic way to present program output, aiding user understanding. Use it when displaying expected output from commands or scripts. So I'm going to add a new section for our sample element example, and I will type the paragraph element. When you run the command, you might see the following output, for example. So we'll add the output in a sample element. Just type the sample element tag over here. As you can see, it has an opening and a closing tag, and in between I will add, for example, file not found. Do not confuse the sample element with the keyboard element. Use the sample element only for output formatting issues. Ensure that the sample element is not mixed with other elements that may change its meaning, like inline formatting, for example, the strong element. Now, another element, we have the variable element. The variable element denotes a variable in programming or mathematical context. It signifies that the text is a variable or a placeholder. It differentiates variables from regular text, providing clarity. Used when referring to variables in programming examples, formulas, or equations. Now I'm going to add a new section for our variable element example. Just gonna type the H2 element, and I will add a paragraph element. For example, I will type the formula for calculating the area of a circle is, and now you can add a variable element. As you can see, it has an opening and a closing tag. Now here the letter A, it is a variable that represents the area of the circle. So I'm going to type the letter A between the variable elements, the opening and the closed variable element. And now we're going to add a variable element. I will add the pi symbol. And now we're going to add a third variable, will be the r variable. This r variable represents the radius, which is the distance from the center to the edge of the circle. Okay, now you can see how this formula is displayed on the page. Avoid using the variable element for regular text or terms that are not variables. When using the variable element, provide the context so that audience understands what the variable represents. Now to the final element over here, we have the code element. The code element represents a fragment of computer code typically displayed in a monospace font. It provides semantic meaning, helping search engines and assistive technologies understand that the text is a code. Used when presenting code snippets, programming functions, or technical syntax. Now I'm going to add our final section for the code element example over here. Add the paragraph element. For example, I'm going to type to declare a variable in JavaScript. Use the syntax. The syntax is a code, or we will type this syntax between the code element. The code element has an opening and a closing tag as well. Let's say let variable name equals its value. So as you can see how this final element displays its content on the page. Don't use it for regular sentences or paragraphs. It should only contain code. Ensure that the code is presented clearly and accurately without syntax errors. We have reached the end of today's video. I hope it was useful. Thank you all for watching.